No, well, you're not really in line and in tune with what is going on, but it's a 21-year-old youth. 21-year-old youth really boss America's secret out there, whether deliberately or not, but the amount of information we give the world about what America was doing, including spying upon them own allies, spying upon Israel. America and Israel have the biggest connection and ties. Yet till America is spying on Israel. This is not something where I'm gonna bring up conspiracy theory, you know. It's all over the news. Them spying Israel, America is spying on Israel. America have agents in Russia. I tell the Ukrainian, it's like a proxy war, a fight. You know what proxy mean? Proxy means you're involved in something, but you make somebody else deal with that something for you. Yes, proxy. You're involved in something, but you make somebody else deal with where you are. Deal with where you should have deal with. You make somebody else deal with it. And that is where I go on with America. It's really America fight the war, you know. Yeah, man, you know how much billions of dollars them send to Ukraine and how much ammunition, and them a request ammunition from Germany. Them a request it from England. All over the place, them a try to get it. Proxy war. You know, you fight a war and I go like, you know, I fight the war and you're in the country, I shot down people and I drop bombs same way like it's your war. You know, see, and now we see it is spreading. It's spreading. Because the Chinese, them are back Russia. Because you know them have a thing named BRIC. We've been talking about BRIC for years now. BRIC is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and America. And now we hear Saudi Arabia try to get involved with BRIC. And we hear even Mexico are trying to get involved with BRIC. So most of the country them are turn away from America because they realize that America policy is America policy. It have nothing to do with nobody else but America. And that is really the problem. So China step in now like a big guy because China declare themselves bigger than America and them not care with all the talk, America talk, them no business. But it's a very interesting thing to say. Where meanwhile the Iranian them I come closer to the Arab them and something I go on because the Iranian them a drop bomb in Syria and I kill American. And with the years, you know, them never move out all of the American, they never move out all the American them. And them drop, must 3 times them drop bomb in Syria and kill American. And the American them now start drop back bomb in Syria. But this man where them supposed to get rid of how much years now, him still there around the place. Yes, him still there around the place. So, and then America tried tells them on Taiwan side in the other part of the world there, where them have whole heap of arms are built up over there. So, and I say if China make a move against Taiwan, them are gonna make a move too against China. It's wars are rumors of wars.
You are listening to the Black Radar YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button and keep listening.
I'm going to play it for the people them. It come from democracy now. Yes.
We end today's show looking more at the recently leaked Pentagon documents, which have revealed secrets about the war in Ukraine, as well as U.S. spying on its adversaries and allies, including Israel and South Korea. The BBC reports one document shows dozens of special forces from Western nations, including the U.S., are operating inside Ukraine. The document, which was marked top secret, says the U.K. has 50 special forces, Latvia 17, France 15, U.S. 14, and the Netherlands has 1. The Pentagon and Justice Department are investigating the source of the leak. On Tuesday, I interviewed James Bamford, a longtime investigative journalist, author focused on the intelligence community. In 1982, he published The Puzzle Palace, the first book exposing the inner workings of the NSA, the National Security Agency, like many times larger than the CIA. His latest book just out is called Spy Fail: Foreign Spies, Moles, Saboteurs, and the Collapse of America's Counterintelligence. I asked Jim Bamford to talk more about what the documents reveal about the Ukraine war, among other issues.
Well, I think it paints a clearer picture of what actually is happening over there. There's been the problem on cable news, both Fox, CNN, MSNBC. You get a lot of people that are pro-war, and they're the members of Congress, senators, and so forth, and they're all giving these upbeat accounts of how well it's going for Ukraine. The documents give a far more realistic view, saying that basically it's going to come down to a stalemate. There is not going to be any big winners necessarily, and the Ukrainians are in a very bad position because they're not getting enough ammunition. The Russians have much more access to ammunition than the Ukrainians do. So there's a switch between the way America perceives the war, I think, to these documents, which give a more realistic, because it's done with intelligence, more realistic view of how the war is going.
There's some interesting findings in these documents that have been released. One, The Guardian points out, one slide suggested a small contingent of less than 100 special operations personnel from NATO members France, America, Britain, and Latvia were already active in Ukraine. Talk about the significance of that.
Well, that's what the Russians have been charging for a long time, that the U.S. is more heavily involved, or not just the U.S., but NATO and our NATO partner countries have been involved far more closely and far more directly with the war than is led to believe by the government, by the Biden administration. So it adds to the weight of those charges that the U.S. and its allies and the NATO partners are more heavily involved in this war. And that's a very dangerous situation, since you've got nuclear powers involved, Russia, the United States, France, and so forth, all nuclear powers, and we're all fighting over this one piece of territory, and it keeps getting more and more out of hand. So I think that's a very big danger.
The New York Times points out military analysts said the documents appear to have been modified in certain parts from their original format, overstating American estimates of Ukrainian war dead and understating estimates of Russian troops killed. The modifications could point to an effort of disinformation by Moscow, the analyst said.
Well, that's a bit of an overstatement. I think what actually happened, I mean, if you read closely, the documents the documents were original. They were placed on the internet in their original form. And then what apparently happened was somebody copied some of those documents, and then they altered a bit of the numerical equivalence of how many died on which side and so forth. So the documents are real. The documents are not disinformation. Somebody apparently took some of those documents, a couple of them, and crudely changed a few numbers, but it doesn't affect the overall value of the documents that were released.
Another point the New York Times makes, the Russian military may be flailing, but the private Wagner mercenary group, led by an ally of President Vladimir Putin of Russia, is flourishing in much of the world. Wagner is working to thwart American interests in Africa and has explored branching out to Haiti, right under the nose of the United States. Jim Bamford.
Well, that's been going on for quite some time. It's not just Russia, it's China has been working hard in Africa to develop. I mean, as the U.S. has been bombing Middle Eastern countries and spending trillions and trillions of dollars on these useless wars, we get into the Chinese and the Russians, to a large degree, have been spending billions of dollars ingratiating themselves with African countries, building bridges, building roads, and so forth. So it's not a big surprise that virtually none of the African countries have joined in the embargo of Russia, or the sanctions, and that's why the Vice President Harris flew over to Africa to try to bring back some of that goodwill that we have been squandering while we've been launching wars in the Middle East.
And then, quoting the Washington Post, the documents also demonstrate what's long been understood but never publicly spelled out. The U.S. intelligence community has penetrated the Russian military and its commanders so deeply that it can warn Ukraine in advance of attacks and reliably assess the strengths and weaknesses of Russian forces. A single page in the leaked trove reveals the U.S. intelligence community knew the Russian Ministry of Defense had transmitted plans to strike Ukrainian troop positions in 2 locations on a certain date in February, and that Russian military planners were preparing strikes on a dozen energy facilities and an equal number of bridges in Ukraine. James Bamford.
Yeah, those are the most significant, I think, of all the revelations, because there's only really 2 ways that the U.S. could have gotten that intelligence. One is through signals intelligence, the NSA, and the other is through human intelligence, basically the CIA. So in either of those cases, what the Russians are going to do once they learn this is do an extensive mole hunt and analysis of their communications. So the mole hunt, they'll be looking for any humans that might be assisting the United States by telling them this information about what the dates and the times of these planned operations, and they'll be checking all their communications facilities, changing their codes and so forth, in case we're getting this information by eavesdropping on their communications, by the NSA picking it up. So in either case, it's bad news for the United States, because we may be losing that whatever source it was that we were getting that information from.
And one of the things NBC pointed out was a February 28th document assessing pathways for Israel to provide lethal aid to Ukraine, providing hypothetical situations that might drive Israel from its balancing act between Kyiv and Moscow. Marked secret, the document also suggests what Israeli weapons could be transferred to Ukraine, like Israel's Javelin equivalent and other missile systems. The analysis says the most plausible scenario is that Jerusalem adopts a Turkish model under U.S. pressure. Like Ankara, it would mean that Israel sells lethal defense systems or provides them through third-party entities while openly advocating for peace and offering to host mediation efforts. James Bamford.
Well, once again, it shows how widespread the NSA's eavesdropping capabilities are in terms of picking up what's going on within the Israeli Knesset and the Israeli president's office and so forth, or prime minister's office. So it shows the wide variety of how much we're eavesdropping. The United States has been pushing Israel to get more heavily involved in the supply of weapons to and technology to Ukraine, but Israel doesn't want to do it because it doesn't want to anger Russia. Russia sort of is turning a blind eye to Israel's attacks in Syria, and they're afraid that if they overtly aid Ukraine to a much greater extent, then Russia will be angry at Israel and not allow Israel basically to send its fighters into Syria anymore. So it's a complicated situation, but the United States is apparently able to eavesdrop on decisions that are made within the Israeli government.
And also this latest news out of these documents that Mossad, Israel's spy agency, the equivalent of the U.S. CIA, was pushing Israelis and fomenting a rebellion against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for gutting the Israeli judiciary.
Well, it shows that we're also eavesdropping on their equivalent of the CIA, basically, the Mossad. And in my book, Spy Fail, I write extensively about how we eavesdrop on Israel. I mean, there's a huge building in the outskirts of Washington, D.C., in Maryland, where the Hebrew linguists are all gathered, and they eavesdrop on whatever communications goes in and comes out of the Israeli embassy. So the U.S. does a great deal of eavesdropping on Israel, both within Israel and of its diplomatic facilities in the U.S.
And just to refresh our audience's memory, we last had you on, Jim, as we talked about Spy Fail, your new book, and your revelations about Benjamin Netanyahu's interference with the 2016 election. The media made a lot of allegations that Russia was involved with subverting the U.S. U.S. elections in 2016. But just lay out once again for us what you learned about Netanyahu's efforts to support Trump in the 2016 election and the extent to which he went, something that is known by the U.S. government and Congress but not revealed.
Well, everybody remembers Russiagate and the hysteria that the news media, mainstream news media, basically focused on that for 2 years, looking under every rock for a Russian spy or Russian collaborator, and they never found any. There never was any collusion between the Trump administration and the Trump campaign and the Russian government. So the Mueller report came up with a blank when it came to Russian collusion. What people don't know, until I reported in my book, is the fact that the Mueller group, the Mueller investigation was not only looking at Russia, they were also looking at other countries that may have been involved in eavesdropping and spying within the U.S. and also being involved with campaigns. And what they found was that there was an Israeli agent who had been sent over by Prime Minister Netanyahu to collude with the Trump campaign. The idea was that the Israeli agent would pass on intelligence that the Israelis came up with to help this is intelligence on Hillary Clinton, to help the Trump campaign win. And the quid pro quo for that was that the Trump campaign, or President Trump, once he was elected, would recognize Jerusalem as being the sole, basically, possession of Israel. In other words, it wouldn't be divided between Israel and Palestine, which is always would have been the hope to have a peaceful resolution of that. It would be solely Israeli. So that was the deal. And I discovered this by coming across the actual affidavit, FBI affidavit, and search warrant. The search warrant was for the communications of this Israeli agent, and it laid out in the affidavit, the FBI affidavit, exactly how this plot took place. So it was extraordinary to see that all these 2 years they were doing this investigation on Russia and coming up empty. And they never revealed to the American public the fact that there was this Israeli agent who was deliberately attempting to throw the election for the benefit of Benjamin Netanyahu.
So going back, James Bamford, to these latest revelations, I'm wondering, I mean, you have been studying for decades, and Spyfell, your new book, shows this, of course. Wondering what surprised you most, whether it's the scope of the documents across all of these agencies or where they were released on this gaming platform, the name released under, what is it, WOWMAO, W-O-W-M-A-O. Was it the fact that the U.S. government didn't seem on top of it? I think Austin, the defense secretary, was just briefed last week. And what it means, I mean, if they're able to find, and do you think they'll find the person or persons involved with this?
Well, basically all those things surprised me. You know, it's the first time I've ever seen documents leaked onto a gaming platform. But if I was to guess, just arbitrarily guess, as I mentioned before, there's basically 3 or 4 reasons why people steal secrets and make them and release them. One is that they're actual spies and they want to make money and they want to sell them to a foreign government. Another is that they have ideological reasons. They want to help a foreign government, so they leak it. They're not looking for money. They just leak it for ideological reasons. And a third reason is anger. They didn't get the promotion they wanted, or they aren't treated as well as they think they should be in the office. So to get back at the government.
The informative information presented in this video is motivational and is positively aimed at inspiring, educating and entertaining the viewers with the cutting edge of critical reasoning. If you enjoy the contents on the Black Radar YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to show your support.